All right, let's dive right in. We're going to talk about an ancient text that, according to a really fascinating interpretation, is more than just a book. It's a prophetic clock, a countdown to future events that was supposedly written centuries and centuries ago.
So here's the big question, right? Can a text that's, 2,500 years old actually predict the future to the exact day? I mean, that's the wild claim at the heart of the prophecy of Daniel's 70 weeks. Now, it's a huge topic, and it's fascinated people forever. And just so we're clear, the interpretation we're going to walk through today, it's just one of several major ways to look at this.
Yeah, and get this. Some sources have called these specific verses, we're talking just 4 verses here, the most astonishing 4 verses in the entire Bible. I mean, wow. So what's the big deal? What is this ancient countdown all about? Let's get into it.
Okay, first, let's set the stage. You've got the prophet Daniel, he's a captive in Babylon, and he's reading the scrolls from the prophet Jeremiah. And he figures something out. He realizes the 70-year captivity he's been living through is almost over. So what does he do? He starts praying, like this really intense prayer for his people. And right in the middle of it, boom, the angel Gabriel shows up and interrupts him to deliver this mind-blowing prophecy.
All right, so to really get a handle on this thing, we've got to crack the code, It all centers on this idea of 70 weeks. But spoiler alert, they are not the kind of weeks you and I are used to.
And here it is, the first major key to this whole puzzle. When the text says a week, in this context, it doesn't mean 7 days. It means 7 times years. The original Hebrew word, Shabuah, just means a 7. So folks who hold this view say the original audience would have totally gotten this idea of a week of years, kind of like how we know a decade is 10 years. And that one little shift, it changes everything.
So you do the math. 70 weeks times 7 years per week. And what do you get? 490 years. That's the total timeline. The angel Gabriel says this entire 490-year period is decreed or determined for Daniel's people and for Jerusalem. And it's all to achieve these 6 huge world-changing goals. Things like, ending sin for good and bringing in everlasting righteousness. But here's a massive twist. According to this interpretation, that 490-year clock doesn't just run continuously. No way. It's broken up into 3 very distinct acts. You've got the first 69 weeks, or 483 years. Then, a gap, a long pause of unknown length. And finally, that last single 70th week, which is 7 years. Let's tackle each piece.
Okay, now we get to what might be the most jaw-dropping claim of this entire viewpoint. The idea that that first chunk of time, the 69 weeks, the 483 years, wasn't just fulfilled. It was fulfilled with pinpoint mathematical precision, down to the exact day.
So how in the world could that work? Well, here's the calculation they use. It all starts with a trigger, a specific historical decree from King Artaxerxes of Persia to go and rebuild Jerusalem. We have a date for that, March 14th, 445 BC. Okay, so from that starting line, you count forward. They use what's called a prophetic year of 360 days, which was common in the ancient world. You take the 69 weeks times 7 years. That's 483 years. Multiply that by 360 days, and you get exactly 173,880 days. And here's the kicker. According to this view, if you count forward that many days from the decree, you land precisely on April 6th, 32 AD, the very day Jesus rode into Jerusalem on a donkey, what's known as the Triumphal Entry.
I mean, think about that. The claim isn't that it was a sort of prediction. It's that the margin for error was 0. It was an exact appointment. And proponents of this view will point to the New Testament, where Jesus actually weeps over the city of Jerusalem, because in his words, they didn't recognize the time of their visitation. The implication being, they should have known. The clock was ticking, and the alarm just went off.
Okay, so if that 69th week ended right there, back in 32 AD, then that raises a pretty big question, doesn't it? Where's the 70th week? We've got 7 years left on the clock. And this is where we get to another really critical part of this theory, the idea of a long gap or interval in time.
The way this school of thought sees it, the prophetic clock was essentially put on pause. They point out that the text says certain things happen after the 69th week, but not in the 70th week. Things like the Messiah being cut off, and then later the city and the temple being destroyed, which historically happened in 70 AD. So all that stuff happens in this gap, this interval between week 69 and week 70.
So you have this huge gap in the timeline. The first 483 years are fulfilled. The final 7 years are still to come.
And this time we're living in right now, in this theological system, that's called the Church Age. It's seen as a kind of parenthesis in God's plan for Israel, a mystery that wasn't really detailed in the Old Testament. And that pause on the clock, well, it's been going on for almost 2,000 years now.
But eventually, according to this view, that clock is going to start ticking again. It'll restart for one final week, that last 7-year period. In this period, known as the 70th week of Daniel, is all about what happens with Israel and Jerusalem.
Now hang on, because this is a really important point you have to get to understand this interpretation. The text talks about two different princes. First, there's Messiah the Prince, who showed up right on schedule at the end of the 69 weeks. But then, the text mentions another guy, the Prince that shall come, and in this framework, that's not the same person. This second prince is a future bad guy, a world ruler who many people identify as the Antichrist. He's the main character of that final 70th week.
So what happens in those final 7 years? It's laid out like a 3-act play. It supposedly kicks off when this future world ruler makes or confirms some kind of a 7-year deal with Israel. Everything seems okay for the first half, but right at the midpoint, 3.5 years in, he betrays them. He breaks the deal and sets up something called the Abomination of Desolation inside a rebuilt Jewish temple. And that act is what triggers the second half of the week, a period of insane global chaos known as the Great Tribulation.
Okay, let's pull the camera back for a second. Why are we even talking about this? Why does this specific interpretation of a 2,500-year-old text matter today? Well, because it's not just some old theological debate. It's become the actual blueprint for how millions and millions of people today understand end times prophecy. It shapes their worldview, their theology, and even their views on modern geopolitics.
I mean, think about all the ideas that grow out of just these 4 verses when read this way. The whole concept of a future 7-year tribulation period, it comes from here. The belief that the nation of Israel has a specific, distinct role to play in the future, it comes from here. The idea that a third Jewish temple has to be rebuilt in Jerusalem, yep, here again. The rise of a global ruler called the Antichrist, and even the popular idea of the rapture before the tribulation starts, it's all built on the foundation of Daniel's 70 weeks.
So, no matter what you personally believe, you can't deny the incredible impact of this interpretation. It's become this powerful lens for viewing all of history, past, present, and what's still to come. It leaves us with this image of an ancient clock that's been paused but is still ticking. And it forces you to ask a pretty wild question. If this framework is right, and the first 69 weeks happened exactly on schedule, what does that mean for the 70th?